So you have all listened to lots of presentations about APIs. It's been talked about business models and crossing chasms and OAuth and how do you reach different developer groups and developer experience and all that kind of stuff. And it all comes back to this: building a successful API is a technical challenge. Most of us in here are techies. At least we want to pretend that we're still writing code. And we want to build a successful API. And successful API, in my definition, is the same as an efficient API in Ronnie Mitra's presentation earlier today. And that's an API that fulfills the goals of the business. If the goal is that this one partner will integrate with us, and he does, the API is successful. If the goal is that we, for some reason, have to have 100,000 developers using it, and you only get 50, it's not a successful API. By the way, the number of developers using API is a very bad metric, so don't use that. But building a successful API is all about defining the goal, build the API, and see if you actually fulfill the goal. But it's not really a technical challenge, is it? I mean, we can figure it out. We're developers. We can implement OAuth. We can implement JSON. We can implement SOAP if we want that. It's not really a technical challenge. It might be hard, but that's not the primary problem of building a successful API. Technology is a tool. It's not the end result. Are we going to talk about the hammer, or are we going to talk about the house we're going to build with the hammer? I'd rather talk about the house and then figure out, do I need a hammer at all, or is it better to have some cement, maybe? And this all comes down to using technology as the tool it is and not the primary focus. There are more important things to focus on than data formats. There's more important things to focus on than protocols and HTTP headers, even if those are quite fun to talk about. So building a successful API is what's the challenge, really? And I'm going to outline 4 challenges that I think are much more important than the technology, 4 challenges that I keep bumping into when I'm out at customers working with their APIs. And the projects usually go something like this. An IT manager or a developer contacts me, say, we have an API, we're going to release it tomorrow, we might need some external help. I look at the API and maybe fix some technical details or help them with an analysis, but that's not enough. It's not enough that the IT department is behind the publishing of an API. That doesn't make it successful. It requires much, much more. So these 4 challenges are based on real-world experience over and over and over again, and I hope you find it useful. So the first one is an identity challenge. And I'm not talking about some kind of therapy session. You sit down and you figure out, why was my dad mean to me? Nothing like that, but still figuring out, who are we? What do we as a company do? What's your core product? What are you actually selling? Why do you exist? And this is a very basic and very important question, because if you haven't thought about this, you will run into problems. And if you don't agree within your company, which is usually the case, you definitely run into problems. So let me rephrase. One side of this is our app is our product. We have this fantastic website. Everybody goes there. We show ads on it. Happy, happy, happy. Then an API is not a good idea if that's your product, because an API might reduce the number of page views, to take a very simple example. An example of this is Netflix. Adam mentioned it earlier today. Is Netflix API the product? Is the data the product? Or is it the chance that you can spend a whole evening seeing too many episodes of Breaking Bad? And they don't no longer allow anybody to use their API because that's not their primary focus. It's not the data that's their product. It's the experience that's their product, and they want to control that. And if this is the case, that your app is your product, then if you use an API, it should probably be an internal architectural solution and not something that you're trying to sell outside a company. The other extreme is, of course, our data is our product. And that's what Playback just talked about, what David just talked about, that we sell data, and others can build products on our data. We don't care if you build a product that might compete with ours that we also have. because that's not our main product. We have done one packaging of this data. You do another one. Fine. We have a business model, so we make money anyway. Use it. And those are the two extremes. But probably you're somewhere in between, at least for a while. It's not that common with companies that only sells data or services via APIs. At least not if you come to a company that's already existed for 10, 15, 50 years that have working business models, working products. They don't just turn around overnight and say, oh, that was all good. We made lots of money. Let's have an API. They more want to add an API to what they're doing already. And then you need to be very clear, where do we draw the line between the app and the data? Between, like, where do we draw the line to define what our product is? Maybe the data we provide via API is just that people can build sexy small widgets to promote our brand so we can sell our product, which is actually this app or this service or website, or whatever it is. But where you draw that line and where your identity is very, very important. And if you don't think about this, you will run into problems like people in your company saying that, no, we can't do that. That will cannibalize our existing business model. And you will run into that over and over again. And if you run into that, that's basically like saying we can't have an API because the management's going to fight us. And this is important to think about. What are we actually selling? And if you can't agree within your organization, then maybe an open API is not the way to go right now. You need to consider that. It's not always that open API is the solution to everything. It's not a silver bullet. So building a successful API is an identity challenge. That's the first one of the 4 I want to mention. Basically, know who you are before you present yourself to the world. Building a successful API is also a cultural challenge, which is has quite a lot to do with identity, of course, but here I'm talking about the internal company culture in the company that publishes the API. So still, I'm not talking about developers using the API or the end users using the products the developers are publishing. I'm just talking internally in the organization with the data that wants to publish it. And this cultural challenge comes from friction to change. Change is always bad, right? Everything new is bad. That's the standard way to handle change. You resist it. Maybe not in here when there's a lot of early adopters that just want to have the latest thing because it's the latest thing. But that internal friction and this culture challenge is one of the main reasons why APIs projects don't get off the ground. Or if they do get out there as an open API, they're probably unsupported because the guy that developed it the Friday afternoon has left the company and never documented things, and it kind of just dies because nobody uses it. So let's have a bit of a reality check here. If you look at the people in your company at large, and not just developers or the colleagues you sit next to every day, but in a big organization, all the people in sales and marketing and so forth, what do they think when you start talking about APIs? Talking about something technical, it's weird. It's just techie stuff, la 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 la, I don't want to hear. It's something very, very complicated because we start talking about abbreviations. It's JSON, XML, SAML, blah, 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 blah. And you cannot get this, they get this glassy-eyed look, even if they haven't been drinking anything. Then you lost them. Then you lost already. So try to avoid abbreviations. I've learned that the hard way. It's something very, very strange. It doesn't make sense in their world. It's a threat. It's a threat to my job, to the business model, to status quo. It's nothing good. And as soon as you see something that's a threat, you try to fight it or ignore it. Fight or flight. It's not accept and promote. And this is the world we're living in. Because we're talking about APIs as this fantastic new thing. It's almost like we've seen the light. It's something religious that doesn't really cross the people that don't care about religion. So you hear things like, but people can use our data in the wrong way. Horrible. Even if you don't define that wrong way, but it's horrible. People can use it in the wrong way. And how can we control what people are going to do with our data? What you want to say is, let's not control it, let them do what they want, and they do things we could never think about. But they won't listen because people can use it the wrong way, and you're kind of stuck in a loop. So you kind of just want to quote the Star Trek Borg and say, resistance is futile, you will be assimilated, because the APIs are coming, but again, quoting Star Trek is usually not a good strategy. So, management, your management, do they know APIs? And I'm not talking about what is an API technically and which HTTP headers should you set and should you use OAuth, draft, blah, 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 or draft, blah, blah, blah. They don't care. They shouldn't even have to know about OAuth. But they need to know about the business potential, the impact on your industry, what you can do with it, that they're using APIs every day in their iPhone. They need to have an idea what it is. And if they don't know that, how can they design a business strategy to build a successful API? How can they give you the budget to implement it? They won't. So they need to know it. You need to talk to them in their language to show them what it is. Does your marketing department understand what an API is? I would guess no. If you say yes, you're very, very lucky. But unless they know, how can I use an API to promote our brand and to get more people in to buy our product, how can they design a good marketing plan for your API? They can't. So they will start, or they will continue selling the product instead of the data, like the app instead of the data, like I talked about before. And management will see that, well, the API makes no money, let's kill it. And you're dead in the water. So marketing needs to understand the marketing impact of an API and the potential of an API. Does sales know what an API is? And if they don't, how many, many accounts of your API product will they sell? How much money will you make when there's no salespeople behind it, no marketing and sales push? You won't make any money at all. And again, project is dead. And lastly, but quite importantly, does your customer service know what an API is? Skånetrafiken, which is the public transport company in south of Sweden where I live, they have a problem because people are using their API and apparently not doing a very good job of it in some cases when they build an app. And people use this app, it doesn't work, so they call Skånetrafiken customer service, which is not the people that built the app, so they shouldn't be responsible, they think, and this API is just horrible because we're getting support calls for something we didn't do and can't control. And that's because whoever published Skånetrafiken's API didn't first go to the customer service rep, say, this is what we're going to do, this is the impact, if you get this kind of call, maybe get it over to this guy that knows what an API is. And again, everybody that's answered the phone doesn't need to know the technical definition, but I need to know what's our role in it and what do we do about it and what's the potential. So don't forget about customer service. If they yell loud enough, they will kill your project because it costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of our time. That's all management will hear, and you get no budget for next year. So it's not only an IT project. If you have an API that should be public and open, and you want others outside your organization to use, it cannot be an IT-only project. If it's only the IT department doing this, you're set up for failure, sorry to say. You need to involve other parts of the organization, preferably the whole organization if you can. So you have the backing of the whole organization. But also, the IT department needs to eat their own dog food, use their own API, as also been mentioned before several times, to see that it actually works. But still, not IT only. It's a company-wide initiative to work. So building a successful API is an identity and a cultural challenge. Very closely tied together. You can't do one without the other. Unless you figured out who are we and what do we do here, you can't go on and reduce the internal friction to this kind of project. That's all internal problems. Let's look at something that has to do with the relationship between the API provider and the developers using the API. And in extension, also with the end user using the apps those developers produce. So building successful API is a trust challenge. And that's a very important one that several big providers lately have failed at. And it's basically like this. I hereby pronounce you API and developer. You are now married. It's a long-term commitment. Anybody can use an API and build a basically hello world product. A few years ago, that was a Twitter client. Everybody has to do one. Years before, it was something with Google Maps. I'm not sure what it is today. But to go from that little experimental project to a product that's in production over years, maintained, updated, that's a long-term commitment. You need to know that you can trust the API provider. And if you can't, you're not going to use the API and the project falls apart. So what do you actually need to trust? You need to trust that the data is correct, that what the data you get back from the API actually is somewhat corresponding to the truth. You need to know that it's secure, so identity, authentication, authorization, safe storage, that it's properly stored in the NSA data center so you can get it back when you want, that kind of stuff. You need to know that the data is secure. You need to know that the data is available. So uptime, response time, that the data is somewhat complete, that the data you need is available through this API. And again, we're talking about long-term, not just that it's available today, but we will have good uptime in a year, and 2 years, 3 years, so forth. You need to trust that the data is updated, that the whole API is updated. There's new technical requirements, the API needs to adapt. There's new market requirements, the API needs to adapt. There's a bug, the API needs to be fixed. It needs to be kept updated. And if you're going to use a new API and nothing has happened on their blog or their GitHub account or their Twitter account for the last 2 years, maybe move on to the next one. So there needs to be updates, there needs to be activity. And you need to trust that changes are managed. That means that if there's a technical change, you know well ahead of time, so you can take that into account. But it's not just technical change, it's also pricing. So you can't just turn around and say, oh, great that you use my free API. By the way, you owe me $10,000 because if you're going to use it next month, that's the price. It's also licensing terms. Many of you maybe have heard about Twitter's creativity with their license agreements, and Facebook is quite good at changing their stuff too. Many of the big ones are because they just have that critical mass that they can do basically what they want. Maybe they need for business reasons, but it hurts trust. It hurts long-time trust, which means fewer developers will use it to build something. So it has to do not just with technical, but also price, license, everything around the API needs to be well managed and communicated. Trust that you can get help, that there's support. Somebody actually answered that tweet or that phone call or fax or whatever you send in. You need to have build up all this trust, and that's not something you do overnight. You can't just come out and say, hey, trust me, I know I have a black hat on, but never mind that, trust me. It takes a long time. It takes a long time to build a successful API, and trust can be damaged overnight. If you have a lot of downtime over just one day and somebody's built their whole business on you, the trust is gone. If you change your licensing term without telling anybody and you kill off a few startups, trust is gone. So this is something that you build during a long time and that can be gone in a second, which is always something uplifting. So building a successful API is identity, cultural, and trust challenge. So I have only one important one left. And if you can't do this last one, the rest was kind of for nothing. And that is adoption. You want people to use your API. And again, I'm not saying it needs to be every developer in the world using it or 10,000 developers, otherwise we're not happy. Maybe it's enough with that one that builds that great app that's just packaged your data in a perfect way and you can make a lot of money. Maybe it's enough that it's just the department next door in the same company using it because we're not going to have it outside our doors. So how you define adoption in this case is all up to you and your specific business case. But build it and they will come is a very common and not recommended strategy, but that happens a lot. Just you build it, and the developers will just come. So we need to fix all the scaling problems before we release it. But by the way, we won't tell anybody that we released it. And here it is. Nothing. That happens a lot. And it's kind of sad to see those dreams of the 1,000 developers storming your building to get to that API not happening. Because maybe people would come if it was marketed correctly. So you need a marketing plan, which is not really something I as a programmer want to hear. I don't want to have a marketing plan. I want to build something cool, right? But to build something cool, you need to make some money. So you need a marketing plan, and that includes the packaging. Packaging of the data as a product. And in that I include developer portal, documentation, pricing, licensing, but also, do we use REST or SOAP? Do we send this in XML file over SMTP? However people want to consume your data, that's how you should publish it. If they want to have it on stone tablets delivered on a donkey and they're prepared to pay you for it enough that you can feed a donkey and everything, do it. That's more important than doing the coolest, latest JSON REST, woohoo, HateOS, hypermedia, whatever. That's not important. You need to adapt the packaging to the market. Marketing plan needs to, especially if you want to have a public API and want to reach many developers, include being part of the ecosystem. So publishing things open source on GitHub, for example. Your PHP libraries, .NET libraries, whatever, using your API, publish that on GitHub. If you have paid a consultant firm to do an Android app, but the Android app is not really the core product, the data is, publish the source code of the Android app on GitHub. The Swedish National Heritage Board, Riksantikvarieämbetet, they did just that with their Android app because they want people to know about Swedish cultural heritage, not necessarily use their free app. So why don't publish the source code? Maybe somebody else can build a much better app. That's not competition. That's just good. That's more ways to reach the end consumer. And you need to market not just to developers, but to the end users. So 2 examples of that. When Apple are marketing for their iPhone, it's very common that they don't actually market the phone itself, but an app on the phone that somebody else developed. So they're selling the phone, but they're pushing this new app or this game or whatever. You can do the same thing. Push the developers' creations. Have that in your marketing plan. That's going to make you look good, make the developer look good. If the developer is successful, you're successful. Same with anything. Gillette, they don't just show their new 15-blade razor. They also show happy men with beautiful women and expensive cars, because of course, that's the product of, that's what you get from using Gillette, right? So think the same way. Market the end product to the end user. And developers will see that and say, I want to be in on that. Cool, I can get help with marketing. Okay, good. And also see that, oh, I can do these things. That's something that somebody that doesn't know technology can see. I can build these apps with this data. Okay, I better go to my IT department and say, do this. And that means that marketing should guide technical decisions. I don't say dictate. I don't say that marketing department needs to dictate what you're going to do, but it needs to guide the technical decisions. Marketing plan needs to come before you actually decide exactly what you're going to build. So to summarize, we have building a successful API requires that you know who you are, that everybody in your company is behind you, that developers trust you, and that you actually get the developers to use your API. All of these are more important than the technology. But most important, building successful API is fun. So if you haven't tried it, try it. It's a good ego boost. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for coming to Nordic APIs.